It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you for this book that frankly surprised me, not because I didn't think it would be good, but because it's a page turner, which wasn't exactly what I was expecting. It's the story of a really daring man who, with endless creativity and courage, managed to save a precious document that provided great insight into Italy, with the emergence of fascism, insights into Mussolini, insights into the relationship between Italy and Germany, and gives the lie to the well-known "we were only following orders." It's actually the diary of Galeazzo Ciano, who was Mussolini's son-in-law, and also second in command. And that diary proved to be explosive, and it is only through the bravery of Emilio Pucci that we have access to it, even though it was held back for far too long. So I wanted to just briefly give that background because of the centrality of the of this document, without which the story doesn't quite make as much sense. So Terry, maybe you can start just by going back to, you wanted to say 1922.
Yeah. After the war, after the First World War, the so-called war to end all wars, Europeans looked around and they saw three empires vanish overnight. The Russian, the Austro-Hungarian, and the Ottoman. Glorious empires that had been in place for over 500 years. At the same time, if you flash forward to 1922, there are a number of historians who will argue the entire century, 20th century, begins then. Not in 1900, 1922. And why? Because in that 1 year, modernity crashes through what had traditionally been an older world and smashes it with new ideas, new ways of thinking, new politics, and more importantly, a new way of life. What has happened? What happened in 1922? James Joyce, after suffering for years in Trieste and in Zurich, finally publishes Ulysses, which changes language forever. Our friend T.S. Eliot publishes The Wasteland, which sums up the shock and the disaster of the First World War, but somehow mirrors it in a Hindu epic where the Brahmaputra river is always recited again and again. Then Sigmund Freud out of Vienna writes his famous Beyond the Pressure Principle, which opens up psychiatry to the world. At the same time, you have Vladimir Lenin in Russia, who has proclaimed the Soviet Union. You have the Irish Free State being established in Dublin, and over the BBC radio, for the first time, crackled Big Ben across London. All of this is happening in 1922. At the same time, a pandemic that we also just went through is now on its way. The world is buoyant again. It looks like there's a new future. People are excited. And across the Atlantic, Model T Ford cars are coming out of Henry's plant, who Hitler would later call Henrik, our greatest Nazi in America. And at the same time, in New Orleans, A young trumpet player named Louis Armstrong was about to board a train and take it all the way to Chicago to launch the Jazz Age. In October 29th of that year, a brazen politician who had black-shirted followers, who were roughing up lots of people across the country that happened to be on the left, he announces a march on Rome. And sure enough, at the age of 8, when Emilio was growing up, Benito Mussolini does not follow his troops, his squadristi, his ex-veterans, his angry make Italia great again followers. He takes the night train, arrives in Rome at 10 o'clock in the morning. Squadrons are lining the city, all arriving, and the king, strangely enough, decides, I kind of like this fellow. He's bashing up my opposition. And he accepts him, anoints him as the leader of Italy, appoints him as the leader of Parliament, which means then that he, at 39, is the youngest leader on earth. This is all happening when Emilio is 8 years old. And just to give you an idea of what that means, Emilio would have seen in his 8th year, when he went into the classroom, these words inscribed above. Credere means believe, obbedire, obey, combattere, fight. So here is the new face of the 20th century that a failed artist in Munich would take note of, and a general over in Spain would also take note of. It all begins in 22.
I have to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Wait a minute, I have to find this.
It was good. It was good.
Jamie, try this.
No,
Are you sure?
I have.
Okay.
No, excuse me. And I have to just briefly go into another subject, because we are continuously asked,
Yeah.
how can a couple who have been married for 32 years write a book together? It's an achievement, I can tell you. Terry has very briefly something to say about that.
No, we had this wonderful friend. His name was Pete Hamill. He's known in New York as the chronicler of New York, a tough Irish journalist who then went into his novels, his writing, and an extraordinary character. He once told me, he said, Terry, listen, unless your marriage is really steady, I really wouldn't recommend writing a book together. If it's on the rocks, forget about it.
So when I look at this book, I'm reminded of so many moments I wanted to divorce. But then I overcame, and I'm very happy with it. And probably we will do others together. So we can continue with the pictures, because I have, yes,
Here we
there is,
are.
okay, this is Portland, Oregon. And why? Because at a certain moment, Emilio, very young, he must have been like 20, no?
Mm-hmm.
He was faced with a huge decision in his life. He was training for the skiing Olympics when he had the possibility to go to America study. And this was a huge decision. He got a scholarship, and he headed by ship to New York, and then God knows how, hours and days to Georgia, not Portland. This came after. And he went, he was sent with a scholarship to study agrarian studies at the University of Georgia. When he arrived, two things happened. One, he realized that the agrarian studies were concentrated on cotton growing. And he said, no, I want to study about olive trees and wine, because I have to go back to Tuscany. And then a very important thing happened, is he was bombarded with questions by the students about fascism and about his country. And he couldn't answer. He had never thought about it or gone into politics. And he was terribly embarrassed. He tried to defend, and he was terribly embarrassed. And suddenly, at the height of his embarrassment and not knowing, but he also said they were not arrogant, they were very kind, these students. And Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, like with Ukraine. And so, for the first time, I think, in the history of the world, I think, sanctions got into action, and all the European countries, except Germany, boycotted Italy, and he lost his scholarship. So he found himself with no money, and he only had the ticket to go back. He sold this ticket. I still don't know how he did it. And he said, I'm here in America, I want to visit this country. One thing he was fascinated with was the relationship with people, that it was easygoing. He was coming from a very traditional family, very traditional city, and so it was a non-conformist society, and he loved that. And then he just said, okay, and he headed, I don't know why, he crossed America and he headed to Oregon. Jumping on trains, washing dishes, whatever he could do, he did. And then he arrived in Portland, and he was fascinated by this mountain full of snow, covered in snow. And the first thing he did, he saw a poster on a wall. This is in Swedish. Why? Because this actress was the most famous skater, Olympic skater at that time. Yes, and this was Tyrone Power. And they were looking for a stunt man to ski to replace Tyrone Power. So he presented himself, and of course they took him immediately. And it's really rather moving when we found the film, and we know, we don't see his face, but we know it's him coming down. Yes, and then he was told, so he had a bit of money. And then he was told that there was Reed College there, and they said, oh, Reed College doesn't have a ski team. So he just went there. And it's fascinating to read the letter of the dean, Kaiser, the letter of the dean, that describes when there was a knock at the door of his office, and this Italian entered, And he was a bit shocked, how you say.
Actually, he describes him in sort of a three-piece suit, but lots of hay and grass and all sorts of things
Not
all
really,
over the ship.
but I
No,
mean,
he
he was
describes
all
him as
crumbled.
he's obviously been sleeping in haystacks all the way out.
And so he
Just
described this.
A rather curious look.
Yeah, but he described this charming man
Yeah.
with perfect English.
Yeah.
And he said, hello, I'm sorry to disturb you.
Mm.
I've just arrived here and I realized that Reed doesn't have a ski team.
Mhm.
I would like to form the ski team in exchange of tuition because I have no money. And the dean was fascinated. He said, yes. He said, look, you have such a fantastic mountain, you know. And so he said, well, let me see how you ski.
Mhm.
And so they went the morning after, they went at the ski lift, and the dean appeared with his 5-year-old daughter.
Mm.
And Emilio said, can I borrow your daughter for a moment? He said yes, and he went up with her on the ski slope, and he came down with his little daughter on his shoulders, and he just skied down, and he got the job.
But actually, the final scene ends with this spray of snow on Rector Keyser, and his little daughter howling with laughter. And at that point,
And that's Mount Hood, right?
yes, it's
Mount
Montuori.
Hood.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's important to know that he had this. He was there for almost 2 years, and the thesis there he wrote on. He took political science, and then he wrote a thesis on the corporatism. How you say corporativism of in fascism.
Yeah.
And that he could answer questions. He and then he had to leave. He had to leave.
Mhm.
And you have to read the book to know what happens. Because basically, again, he sold his ticket. His father sent him a new ticket for a ship. He went to San Francisco. He boarded another ship. He sold his ticket, and he went to Japan.
Yeah. He went the other way. And it took him about 3 or 4 months, but this is very important because in his designs you can see that journey influenced his eyes to the aesthetics of other cultures that nobody really in Europe had even seen. And so that you save that when you start to look at some of his images. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was completely unaware. No, one thing we must say is that when he formed the ski team, he found all these Americans very inelegant, not elegant on the ski slopes, you know.
Sort of like your college student today.
With dungarees and all that. And he said, no, we have to have you know. He actually designed, it's the first thing he ever designed, but he didn't know he was designing, you know.
Yeah.
And so,
This
yes.
white uniform was just simply a jumpsuit. There was a local company there called White Stag in Portland, and then he put red letters across the front. And he said, if we're going to ski, we have to
Yes.
at least ski in style. You know?
So, what comes next?
Next is
Yes. Okay.
no, echo.
Ecco.
Scusa.
This is really important. This is what Professor Montuori was saying about the Ciano diaries. Because also people ask us, how did you write this book? How it all started? And actually, the way it started was that one day, my aunt, the widow of Emilio, who's a young 87-year-old lady, she called me up and she said, I've been approached to do a documentary, but I'm very uncertain, can you come here, we can talk about it. And she said, I'm uncertain because I don't know anything about the war. She married my uncle, he was 45 and she was 19, 20. And I know now why he married her. It's because he wanted a clean slate. He didn't want anybody to ask him questions about that period. And so I said, look, don't worry. Terry and I are very good in research. We have a passion for research. And we will do all that research of the war. And so we started, and almost immediately we realized that we were walking on how you say, certain grounds, but very interesting. And we went on, and then suddenly they told us the documentary was not going to happen. But we were far ahead. But we didn't think of a book, but just for gaining knowledge, because the more we went on, we gained knowledge on the war, on Italy, and on his life. But I didn't know anything about these things. And so one day in the New York Public Library, we come across a small self-published book called Scoop. And it's about this Chicago, from the Chicago newspaper, Daily News, this journalist who was recounting about these diaries. And in the bibliography, we see, the rapport of Marchese Emilio Pucci in his role in the Charno Diaries. And then we start looking for it everywhere, and it said Federal Archives, National Archives, yeah. And we start looking for it everywhere. And actually, the first person we went to is our friend Mary Lettery, who was, I always looked up to her as a real pro for research. And she really tried and said, look, they say yes, there is, but we can't find it. And Terry can continue on this and how we actually found this, which was a miracle completely.
Yes, and Alfonso will speak to this too, but very few people realize that this was the darkest moment in Italy's history. I mean, a terrifying moment. This is a moment where not only have the Nazis invaded the country and seized control of everything, but they also have a civil war has started. Partisans are up in the hills. They're turning their guns on the old fascist regime that has now dissolved away, turning their guns on the Germans. It is the blackest page of Italian history. But Laird Pearson of the Vogue said, strangely enough, Americans have two visions of Italy, Rome and Dolce Vita, and know nothing of what lies in between. And this is the precursor of what we're going to see. This is the ashes that were burning that finally that phoenix would come out of. These diaries, this actual report lay inside the National Archives in Maryland, in the OSS files, the precursor to the CIA files. This
OSS was the secret American
the
agency.
Organization Secret Service. It was the intelligence gathering and the espionage center of American efforts in the war. And what's extraordinary is that this archive of 538 boxes, inside each box are at least 100, 150 files, not one of them related to the previous file or the successive file. Nothing in chronological order, nothing in order even by subject. There is no way to go through this except one after another. which we could do online, just seeing the various subjects, but multiply 538 times 150, and you imagine how many times you're searching. So after the second attempt of going through, in box 111, I'll give you the 5 that preceded this report. Hospitals in New Delhi, gem dealers in West Africa, Nazi werewolf spies in Syria, Carl Jung, and then all of a sudden, this one pops up. And when we were able to, I won't belabor you with the mad attempt to try and get our hands on this, because you have to understand, this Emilio never saw after he gave it to Alan Dulles, who was the head of the OSS in Switzerland and went on to be the head of the CIA. It was only declassified after Emilio's death.
In 92.
In 92. In 93 it was declassified, and somebody made that calculation. So, what does this report contain? Emilio was asked by Alan Dulles, after these diaries came to him, that the New York Times had called the most important documents of the Second World War. Because very much like the Watergate tapes, very much like some of this Epstein stuff that we've seen, what happened with these diaries is they unveiled, they unmasked the hideous nature, the grotesque nature of not simply the Germans, but also Mussolini's enslavement by them, his servitude by them. Almost the vast majority of Italians didn't want this war, didn't want to go into this war, couldn't bear the idea of fighting alongside the Germans. But this gentleman that you saw earlier wanted his nation to become Prussians. So you see this in a daily recounting through the diaries. What Emilio does is describe how he helped Idanna, how he helped these diaries get across out of neo-Nazi hands, out of the neo-fascist hands. Hitler and Mussolini were all searching for them. He had a price on his head, and you read this like it's all in the first person that he wrote, and it's riveting. And when we saw that, we said, now we can prepare something, because his words will speak to you. When you read it, you're reading him writing it as it happens. And
Yes.
that was the key.
No, throughout the book, we are marginal. We are just the, how you say, the link, trying to, no, not trying, we are linking his words that are throughout the book. So we have his voice, and we have, there we knew we had a book. We have his voice, and we had the legitimacy. We have the legitimate. There's nobody in the entire world who can say, oh, this is not true, you know? And this is very important in this kind of book.
And in these days.
Yes, of course. And the thing is that he was interned in Switzerland for 2 years. The only way he came back from Switzerland into Italy well after the war was finished, because he came back in August 46. And why he couldn't come back? Because Dulles would not give him a letter in which he could declare that he had worked for the Allies. So the fact that he helped Ida Mussolini, the daughter of Mussolini, escaping into Switzerland, and this is what in Italy is known, you know, the gossip and all that. Nobody says she was carrying the diaries of her husband. And I say this because he put these diaries, and there were several notebooks over how many years? He was foreign minister. You know, her husband was the foreign minister.
The war diaries.
The war diaries,
Yeah.
and he cut one side of his trousers. He put them all in. He sewed both sides, and then she wore them around her waist in getting into Switzerland. And this is a very important piece of history.
And we should add that he was in Switzerland, but that before that, he was captured and tortured severely, horribly by the Germans.
By the Gestapo.
Yeah, because they caught him. They caught him and they tortured him to find out where she was, where the diaries were, and that's a rather emotional. It's rather amazing to read that.
And
for me it was.
So it's a moment where here Emilio is before the war. That's how he met this Idanna, the daughter of Mussolini.
This is my father,
Yeah.
and this is Emilio, and Ada's in the middle, and they met skiing.
And then as Alfonso was saying, here's Chano, the son-in-law. Ruth Ben-Ghiat in New York, when she was presenting the book, who's an expert on fascism and authoritarians, happened to say that sons-in-laws are disposable. That dictators love to use their sons-in-laws, but stay tuned, somebody may be thrown under the bus. And in fact, I don't know what I'm talking about, but in fact, Chano ends up being executed by his father. Tried and executed for treason simply because when the Allies landed in Sicily in July 10th of 1943, all the Italians said, basta, it's over. And the Ground Council was brought together. They never even voted for the war, but they were brought together because Mussolini wanted to get their approval. 19 out of 26 voted to fire the famous Duce. Fired him. And the son-in-law happened to cast a negative vote, and he was executed. So it's his diaries that his wife, who now is not on speaking terms with her father, you can imagine, she is running for her life, and Emilio steps in. But Alfonso, you know, this silence that Italy has for this period is profound. No? I mean, absolutely. No one talks about it. No one refers to it. And so to even enter into this viper's nest of who's on what side, because many people had to change sides.
Yeah, and what also becomes clear, and is perhaps rather timely, is that there are these profoundly evil men, and yet it's not just the banality of evil, but it's almost the buffoonery of evil.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Because these people, when you read the diaries, you see just how stupid they are.
Yes.
And that's the thing that is so tragic, because yes, we can laugh, and at the same time, we realize what these men have done, and without really understanding anything, and tricking each other, and playing games with each other, and playing with their egos, and it's devastating, and yet here we are again, arguably.
I was hoping you'd make that link. So here is Ada, and the diary is behind. It says, The Inside Story of the War Makers by Count Chano, the Italian foreign minister now. He'd been dead for 3 years. This was a bestseller across the world. Every Italian read it, just breathlessly. And it was published here in this country in 1940, I believe in 46. And but the Chicago Daily News sold out. It was a huge event. But like many things in history, we pass it by.
Yeah.
And so this is also, in a way, a story about memory, about recapturing memory, about realizing, as Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but boy, it sure can rhyme. Also, there is another figure, Antonio Gramsci, who 6 years after Mussolini had come to power, wrote these prophetic words from the prison, because he was the opposition figure, head of the Communist Party. Antonio Gramsci wrote, "The old age is dying. The new age is struggling to be reborn. This is the time of monsters."
Well, so the players of this story are the diaries
Yeah.
and
The channel.
explain the diaries.
The diaries, the two channels, and these diaries, as Alfonso said, they were the anchor to the conviction of these German war criminals at Nuremberg. Without those diaries, they could say, excuse me, I was taking orders. And he said to me, hey, you must do this, I did this. No. With the diaries, it was very clear that the Germans prepared this war and were going to go to war regardless of whether the Poles gave the Danzig corridor or Danzig. It didn't matter. And so these become the fundamental anchor of what we now call international law, and which one could argue has been broken a few times by someone we all know. But a pre-planned war is the conviction for international war crimes. And it just so happens that the Nuremberg trials, as Emilio's up in Switzerland, recovering from 3 cracked pieces of his skull, having lost hearing in his left ear, his body broken in 100 pieces. He's in Switzerland, and what happens on his birthday? The Nuremberg trials begin.
Yes.
And no one knows that his link in that. This is the first time anybody realized.
And the other important player here is Alan Dulles,
Yeah.
because he's the symbol, the active symbol of the art of betrayal in every sense. So not only he takes the report of Emilio, that Emilio writes for him to get this famous letter, but he publishes it. It's a confidential report. He publishes it in the States, in installments. He pockets all the money, which was a huge amount of money that was given to him.
But he sensationalized it in a very vulgar
Changes
way.
it.
And he uses a pen name, an anagram. He makes the equivalent of $25,000 in those days. It's the equivalent of $450,000 today.
And then his right hand, which was a man called Engleton, James, yes, he publishes, he sells this. He was in Rome at the embassy.
At the embassy.
Yeah, in Rome, American, and he sells this in installments to an Italian newspaper,
So
which
Emilio's,
was the newspaper of Luigi Marzini.
and he also has sensationalized it, made things up, gave it a certain spin, and at the same time, he has made it impossible for Emilio ever to set foot in Italy again.
To come back.
Because everyone accuses him of having sold it to pocket money and enrich himself, not only, but also to aggrandize himself. So, un doppio gioco, a double game.
Yeah.
So, just to let you know that not only was Hitler searching for it, not only did the Gestapo torture him, not only were Mussolini people after him, but once he handed it over to the American hands, the future head of the CIA betrayed him not once, not twice, but 3 times. And you can help them understand more about Angleton because you happen to You were saying James Jesus.
Well, yeah. Well, he became a very notorious figure, and Norman Mailer wrote a book called Harlot's Ghost, which really goes into sort of the degree of paranoia that developed later on when Angleton was confronted with the Soviets. But this was all a group of people that was into double, triple, quadruple attempts to cover up what they were doing and not pay much attention to who got in the way and who they trod over in the process. So it's very, very dramatic, I think. And yeah, I mean, of course, later on they could argue that it was the Soviet Union, so whatever they were doing, we had to do something similar, but clearly it went way beyond what it was supposed to be.
Well, now here we have to change gear, because he manages to come back to Italy. And this is a man who always placed himself where luck could strike. I mean, there are some people who have this talent, and he not only had the talent, great talent, he finds Florence devastated.
This is the Ponte Trinita.
He finds Florence devastated, not only Florence, but entire Italy. And so all these young men looked at this devastation and said, now, what is our future?
And this is the entrance to the Ponte Vecchio.
He had been a heroic pilot in the war, and he had suffered all this. When I read this for the first time, I said, I can't believe this. I can't believe how much this man suffered, because I always saw him upbeat and surrounded by these magnificent colors and clothes and models. I grew up in this family. In Italy they call him palazzo. You know, it's not Buckingham Palace. It is, it is a palazzo, Florentine palazzo. But when I grew up there, it was very gloomy. It was really a sad place for children. There were 2 telephones in the entire place, and it's 1 block. You know, there was no central heating. I always saw people shivering, and then it was, and still is, under the Duomo. And this Duomo was my nightmare, simply because at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I would be there doing my homework. In the winter, it was all wet and damp, and all these red roofs, they were very sad. And these bells would start. These ancient bells, they're as huge as this room, you know. And it was 6 o'clock. And I remember they went on for 10 minutes, you know. And I remember my first, always the same question is, when am I going to get out of here? And how? You know, and how? So, and this finally happened thanks to my uncle, you know.
So what did happen? How did he get you out?
Oh, he offered me a job, and I immediately took it. But this was in 1965, when he was already, you know, it was the famous 60s, and he had started by chance again. There is this photograph. Here we are in Capri, but before then, there is this photograph that is in the cover of the book. This was a page published by Harper's Bazaar in December 1947. This picture, you see a very attractive girl dressed in black. And she's wearing he lent her his skiing trousers that he had made in Florence by a seamstress because he put a stirrup, which, was the first time. And then he lent her his anorak because her clothes were all damp and wet from the day before. So she couldn't ski. And he lent his clothes. And it just so happened that while he was tying her boots, this photographer from Harper's Bazaar came by and said, "What a couple, how elegant she is," and snapped the photograph.
And then asked, "Who designed your clothes?" She said, "Emilio." Like,
No, she didn't say who designed. Where did you get?
yeah, where did you get
And
these
she
clothes?
just said Emilio Pucci.
So,
And this photograph ended up. Toni Frissel was working for Harper's Bazaar. She had been a war photographer, and
she had actually, during the war, had done a whole piece on the Tuskegee Airmen, the black pilots that became quite famous.
And so Diana Breland saw this on her desk and said, "Oh, but this is fantastic. These clothes are fantastic." And she published this page. And then she talked to the buyer at Lord & Taylor, and then the ball started rolling. He got this phone call in Florence saying, "Oh, are you making ski clothes?" And he said, "Yes, of course."
A bit of a bluff.
And they invited him to New York. And I can imagine the way he felt going to New York. And because they wanted samples. And there's a whole chapter about this and how the samples were made by, in Portland,
White Stag.
by White Stag. Lord & Taylor was in connection with White Stag. So when they said to him, "Oh, we're going to make them in Portland, in White Stag," I said, "Oh, but I know them."
Yeah.
And these sorts of incidents are repeated throughout the book, not only during the war, I mean the great luck he had of surviving, and these women who came to his rescue, and double
This
spies,
is Diana Breland.
but also afterwards. There's a whole series of synchronicity that take place.
This is a photograph of Diana Breland made by a fantastic portrait photographer called Priscilla Cattazzi, and she's the daughter of Susanna Agnelli, the sister of Gianni Agnelli. Anyway, she was the daughter also of the founder of Fiat.
Yeah.
And she is a wonderful photographer. So here she
I have a quick question. So, 1 minute he's getting tortured
Yes.
by the Gestapo, and the next minute he's making this incredible fashion.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Well, first of all, Capri has a big role because when he was depressed in life, and one time is when he came back from America, he would head for Naples. His mother, Napolitan, which is a fantastic blood to have, and he had it. So he headed to Naples. He loved this wonderful grandmother, and he would sit in her house and look at this bay, Posillipo, and he could see Capri there and the islands. And so automatically after he came back from Switzerland, that's where he went.
Yeah.
He said, "Capri will cheer me up."
And also that quote about putting yourself in place.
Yes, and he always put himself where chance could act. This is a drawing that he did of his first shop in Capri. Again, luck, stroke. because he didn't have the money to pay for a shop, the rent, and there was a wonderful English woman called Gracie Fields who had built a swimming pool and the first Canzone del Mare, it was called, the Song of the Sea, and it was an establishment where people could gather, and she gave him this little spot at the entrance, and that's where he started. He started in Capri, his first designs, and of course the colors of Capri. You see, the colors of Capri did something to him. These are the first things, and on and on. This is interesting because when he started to do these clothes, the head of the Pucci family was this very strict man who had no children. He was his uncle, had no children, and Emilio was going to be his heir. That's why he went to study agrarian studies, because he was going to receive this huge estate with olive. And so this head of the family called him and said, "Don't you dare to use the Pucci name for clothes. We never had a tailor in the family." And so he said, "No, I won't use it." So it became Emilio of Capri. And he's the first one who wrote his signature on all the fabrics, just Emilio, to make sure it wasn't Emilio Pucci, Emilio. And he did it for fun. The word brand had not been coined yet. And so...
and ironically, or perhaps not ironically, he only used his last name once. Zio Roberto, Uncle Roberto, was horizontal and not vertical any longer.
I love this picture. This is the first hat he did. And this picture I found in a small newsreel on Capri from 1954. And I went all the way to Cinecittà, to the archives, to get the permission for this one little thing. For me, it is the representation of all the joy that he brought to fashion. This is him at the door, this immense door of this of the Palazzo Pucci, that was then divided between my father and my uncle. And in my childhood, in this very gloomy place, the only ray of light was him. And twice, when he started all these fashions, which was in 51, 50, the fact is that I would look forward to January and then June, the fashion collections coming to Florence. And we were invaded by these models. And he would call my father and say, do you have place for 3 girls? 3? And my father would always say, yes, of course. and so they would occupy these bedrooms. And I would witness every morning, them doing exercises and non-eating. And I was 9 years old, and I always said I could have grown with big complexes, physical complexes, because I was just a very normal little girl, because not very attractive, but I didn't. I didn't grow up with these complexes. Why? Because it was a spectacle, a continuous, incredible theater. And I knew that it didn't belong to me. I was just a witness, I was just front row, So, you see, there was a man in Florence, a really enlightened man called Giambattista Giorgini, and he said, wait a minute, Paris has all the fashions, but why don't we do them why don't we do in Florence too? Journalists, buyers would love to come to this city, and the city can become a protagonist of fashion. And this is what he did ingeniously. He was a genius. And so the fashion collection took place in the Palazzo Pitti in this incredible,
what they call the Sala
La
Bianca,
Sala.
the white hall that had sort of, you can see the
Chandeliers.
Corinthian columns with stucco, but a completely white surrounding setting, and then up would come the model in the front, in the middle, and all these colors that just bedazzled the fashion buyers who were invited down after Paris, and they were absolutely blown away because Giorgini understood, look, we have these palazzi, we have these beautiful places, gardens, let's seduce the fashion journalists. So they would come down and be treated like ambassadors from foreign countries.
but also it was a city of artisans.
Yes.
It was a city of artisans from way back in the 13th century.
And whenever Emilio was asked about what kind of designer, stilista is the word in Italian, he would always stop the journalists and say, sono un artigiano fiorentino. I'm a Florentine artist. By doing that, what he was doing is celebrating the 500 years or 800 years of Florentine artisan craftsmanship, which, of course, Paris was all about silk, about lovely, massive gowns, about just a few people could afford it. Now, all of a sudden, the Italian
Made in
works,
Italy.
made in Italy,
Yeah.
could be sold around the world.
And it's
You asked me before what started it also. I mean,
right.
one,
Thank you. Yeah.
one has to realize that Florence became famous in the world, and at one point it was the richest city in the known world
Yeah.
because of textiles
Yeah.
and silks and the art of dyeing silks, and also the art of softening wool. Wool was coarse, itchy, horrible, and that's what people wore, in Northern Europe, everywhere. And it became, because of the art of softening silk, it became the noisiest. One has this idealism about Florence in the Renaissance. It was the noisiest city of Europe, because along the Arno, where the Ponte Vecchio is, every 50 meters, every 100 meters, there would be a mill,
A
no?
huge water wheel with a massive mallet that would smash down on the wool, and with every beat of the wool would soften it. And the Arno is not a simple, soft river like the Seine or the Thames. It can be a very violent river. It has a steep precipice. So the water and the velocity of the water is actually what allowed the Florentines to soften the wool, and then they invent the florin, the dollar of Europe, the first gold coin in Europe. And this becomes literally the reserve currency of all of Europe. And the money pours in, but most importantly, the Medicis haven't arrived. They're still up in the hills cutting down trees and turning the trees into coal. They don't arrive until 250 years later. It is the artisans of Florence, the guilds of Florence, that build every single church that you've seen, build the Palazzo Vecchio, build the Bargello, all before the year 1300. This happens between 1250 and 1300. It is the powerhouse of Europe. And Emilio, by saying sono un artigiano fiorentino, is celebrating all of that.
So when the Medici arrived, everything was done.
Everything, but they got all the credit.
Everything was done.
Yeah.
What they did was to sponsor artists
Yeah,
and painters.
a couple of artists.
Yeah, so yes to an artigiano fiorentino, and also coming out of that horrendous
Yes.
war experience,
Yes.
you mentioned the word joy, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think even today,
Yeah.
when we think of Pucci, we think of this sort of exuberant, almost psychedelic. Hey, we're in San Francisco, right? So
There you
definitely
go.
there's a psychedelic tinge to it.
Absolutely.
And where does that come from? What?
Well, it comes from character. And if you have a positive character, and you don't complain, and you don't this, you attract people. And this is what he had. No matter what, not only, you see, he never spoke about his past. But this was not uncommon. I never heard anybody in my childhood speaking about the war. My father, who knew everything, he didn't speak. Because people had to group all their energy and look forward and go forward, you know, to the future, you know. And also, it's also very difficult in our normal life when we've had a bad experience. You know, we know what it means, but even talking to a friend, we can only say a little bit, you know. So can you imagine then, you know?
There's something else that's happening. Remember, Italy for 20 years, they call it ventennio. Those are the 20 years of fascism. The only colors accepted were black, very dark blue, gray, and perhaps a bit white.
Sounds like a party.
When I said that in New York, half the audience felt very insulted. I call it New York black. Oh, it's the new black. He breaks that mold. All of a sudden these colors come in, but they're not colors, soft pastels and soft. They are explosive colors that you only find in the tropics. You find it in India, you find it in Africa, and at the same time you have all of this happening. All of the major movie studios are coming to Cinecittà. Why? Because you can make your films cheaper in Italy, and they have casts of thousands. Think of Cleopatra, Ben-Hur, Core Values. And all of this is happening when Audrey hops on the motorcycle with Gregory Peck and wins the Academy Award. Nobody's ever seen this child before, and it begins the Dolce Vita.
This is an interesting dress, because he made it for Georgia O'Keeffe. She wanted a black and white dress, and that's what he made, and it's in the museum in Santa Fe. I thought of, you know, putting this instead is a Sicilian cart. He did all this collection inspired by Sicily and the colors of Sicily, and the Sicilian cart is an institution in Sicily. But also, that was, okay, Capri, Sicily, and then came other cities of, he was inspired by culture. See? This is the Sicilian collection. That we don't know. We think it may be Grace Kelly, maybe not. We never found out. This is interesting. This mosaic is really huge, and it's in Sicily, in the highlands, in the center of Sicily, and it's from the Roman times, and it shows how the Romans, at the time of the Romans, there was a bikini as in sports, you know? And so he chose, when he started to make bikinis, he chose to photograph them there. This is also an interesting picture. This was made by a man called Stanley Marcus, who started Neiman Marcus, which was the really most glorious department store, if you can say that, in America. And he came to Florence, he was responsible also, apart from Diana Vreeland, he was responsible for the great success of my uncle. And so he made this picture, and you can see Emilio filming him. And this little camera we still have. When he traveled the world, this is what he brought. He filmed, and he filmed everywhere he could. He knew there were cultures, traditions alive, and
he spoke of alegria, what you were talking about, joy, bringing alegria to the world. He used that word continually.
Yeah, this is interesting because this is Susanna Agnelli, who had helped him in Switzerland when he was interned. She was in Lausanne, and the Agnellis were friends from childhood, because the Forte dei Marmi is not what it is now, you know. It was a very, that's where my father also, as children, they spent all the summer. And so with the Agnelli children, they were always on the beach together, and Susanna Agnelli became very important in Switzerland. And her mother, who was half American, Virginia Agnelli, she sheltered Emilio when he was writing the report in Lausanne. So then, when when Stanley Marcus gave him the Neiman Marcus Award in 1954, Fashion Award, he called Susanna, Suni, that was her nickname, and said, "Would you come with me to Dallas?" And she said, "Yes, but would you travel after across America, because I'm presenting all my fashions?" And she said, "Yes." And so this, she wore all the time this chemisier. Anyway, it's a shirt dress in different colors. This is the Palio of Siena, which many people know. And why are we showing this picture? Because this racehorse has a pageantry that dates back 5 centuries, that look at the colors, you know, that inspired him.
And back to your psychedelic geometric signs, those are flags created 500 years ago that are as hip and groovy as anything you'll ever see. And they represent the 17, each one represents one of the 17 contradas or groups in the city. And this deeply affects Emilio.
So he prepares a collection of, I don't know how many, they're just one more beautiful than the other, and it was a big exhibition in the Palazzo Pitti a few years ago.
It's said that 187 colors that he had invented were used for this collection.
There he is, filling up colors. He knew all the colors, some colors he actually created, invented, but he knew all these colors by their number. You see?
And now he starts to travel the world.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because he went to Java and Bali in 1962. And he really was inspired by the batik designs, the composition of the batik. Johan, you can see that, no? He's Javanese.
And the batiks always have that vertical stripe to the left and the rectangle to the right. And here you see that repeated.
This is the Vivara design, which was the perfume. Vivara was the name of the perfume. There were no brands, and there were no,
franchise.
So these designers in the world were not many. There was Dior, there was Nina Ricci, there was Balenciaga. You could count them, 6 or 7 maximum. And not many had the perfume. Now the perfume doesn't exist anymore. But you see, these are all the dancers of Bali, And I ended up not in fashion. I worked with him for 3 years, and then I realized that it wasn't my passion. Let's put it like that. Also because of these franchises and this arrival of brand. The moment there is a brand, there is a company, and they're shareholders, and it changes all. Nowadays, fashion is different. And I ended up in Indonesia for quite a few years. And so I'm fascinated when I see all his designs on Bali. I was really impressed because he got he didn't know that he could sketch, in his time. He didn't know that he could draw. He never went to fashion school. See, this is the gong of the Balinese gamelan. It's fascinating, the iconography, And this is all poses of dancers. It's it's really, this is just a taste, and this is a wraparound sarong, and the kebaya is what the Balinese women and the Javanese women wear.
But some of those earlier patterns, he really respected the cultures that he was seeing, that he was representing. He never made up names. He would give them names like Semarang, which is a port city in Java, or Merapi, which is a volcano outside of Yogyakarta. So in that sense, there's also a touch of ethnography in what he's doing.
Terry, let's go on because it's...
Okay.
So this is India, and then...
At the Udaipur Lake Palace.
And then we have Machu Picchu. He travels the world, and he really is fascinated by all the cultures. And see, this is the 60s.
Swinging 60s.
And we arrive at this is just different Marilyn Monroe, and they were all wearing something. And this is what I remember in my childhood witnessing, you see. You must imagine behind there, somewhere, there was a little girl like this, and zipping up models, bringing water to the photographers. So this was the famous spectacle, you see. And then the flood of Florence, 1966, when Florence was just, the Arno got very angry. And Emilio played a big role, there he is. He played a big role with the artisans in trying to save everybody. And he came to America, and he was very, very famous at the time. And so he traveled America, and he managed to raise a lot of money to distribute to these artisans that had lost every tool, everything. And this is 2014, Florence. He had designed these scarves with the baptistry years earlier.
In 1955.
Yeah, he had designed in every cathedral, also Venice and all that. And they decided to do like Cristo. And this is the Vivara pattern, which there's a boat underneath there, and which he used to publicize the perfume. And then this is the last thing. Is the last thing, and it is this, that in 1971 he got a call from an astronaut from Cape Canaveral, and said, Mr. Pucci, we are ready for the mission to the moon, and we would like you to design the emblem. We don't have an emblem. So he said, yes, what an honor to do this, because he was a pilot, and, the sky and the heavens, and he designed this emblem. That is the moon surface. And then they loved it, and they called him back a week later, and they said, we are ready. They invited him, of course, and we are ready. Do you have an object that you want to bring to the moon and back? And he said, no, I can't think of anything, but I have an idea. And he went to a goldsmith in Florence. At the time, every neighborhood had a goldsmith. And he designed a small medal. He designed 11 of them. One was for the Pope. One was for the President of Italy. The other one was President of the United States. And they had their name on the other side. 4 were for him, his wife, and his 2 children. And then there was 3 for the astronauts, and there was 1 with written moon behind, and that was left on the moon. And I find myself today having this one, one of the medals, and it was his, you see. And it's a real talisman. That's it.
So to give you an idea of his depth, this was on his wall, behind his desk, for 25 years. And 3/4 of the Florentines who entered inside had no idea what it meant. Tagore won the Nobel Prize for Literature, the first non-European, in 1913, and was a polymath, a master humanist. And that sums it up.
There is a lady that is asking a
Please.
question.
Please.
How did he learn sew and design? Where was the transition for him understanding fabrics and sewing and
Well, this is it, you see. This is what people ask. And I cannot answer you because he was a self-made, he had imagination. He surrounded himself with these incredible seamstresses. And of course, Florence was, it was an easy thing to find a good artisan. And
I think that this story goes to the World War II Museum in New Orleans. And my husband had his papers there. And they love him, you know that. And I just love it. And I think the reason he was so positive, pardon me, lui era canonona del
Napoletano, certo. But
It all comes back to Naples, for those of you who
I didn't know there was a World War II museum in New Orleans, of all places.
We'll have a trip before you.
the question.
Thank you so much for your patience. It's not something that you can say in just a few words.
No, but the one takeaway is when the strong man falls and the fear dissipates and the darkness ends, then the flowers can blossom in all the creative arts. And that's exactly what happened in the Italy that you love after the war. But the message is a strong man has to fall. Thank you.